All right. We've gotten the official thumbs up. So we're talking about, in my personal opinion, one of the coolest loan programs and / tax credit programs in the state of Oregon, the Oregon Affordable Housing Tax Credit. I'm Clayton Crowhurst with Northwest Housing Alternatives. I'm a housing developer. I've used the OHTC program on preservation and new construction. And my goal here is to keep everybody awake and full of sugar and having so much fun talking about OHTCs. As you can tell by both Martin and I have our sleeves rolled up. So this is a casual, cool, not nerdy at all presentation on OHTCs. Rachel, you even have your shirt sleeves rolled up. So yeah, we're all just like your friends here to talk about OHTCs. So do y'all want to introduce yourselves?
Hi, everyone. I'm Martin Jarvis. I'm the State Tax Credits Program Analyst at OHCS. If you ever have any OHTC questions after this or during this, go ahead and ask me. I am always available on my phone or email, any of that stuff. It's a safe place.
Hi, I'm Rachel Amori-Vidu. I use she, her pronouns, and I work for Network for Oregon Affordable Housing, also known as NOAA. We are a permanent lender for multifamily affordable housing mainly. A huge proponent of the OAHTC. We also do some acquisition lending and pre-development lending, and we are a CDFI.
Great. So we're, like I said, super excited to talk through this program. I think, so Martin, you're good with kicking us off. And then Rachel and I will kind of tail on to the end of the presentation. Our whole goal here is to keep a short, compact presentation so that we can talk with y'all about questions, scenarios, and I have a surprise when we get to the question session to encourage people to not be shy. So just you'll have to wait and find out.
It's a doozy. Okay, can we go to the next slide? So here is the essential agenda of our presentation. I'm going to give a program overview from the agency's perspective, and then I'm going to hand it over to Rachel and I'm sorry, I blanked on your name. Clayton, yes, and Clayton to I like it. To give perspectives from the lender and from a developer. Yeah, so next slide. So the Oregon Affordable Housing Tax Credit is essentially a lender credit. What that means is that in exchange for reducing interest rates on permanent loans, the lender gets tax credit and the developer gets cheaper financing. We then use that difference in the cost of financing to pass through the savings to the tenants in the form of rent reduction. The rent reduction does not have to be over the entire project. It can be targeted at individual units to achieve various goals. There are two exceptions to the pass-through requirement. They are manufactured dwelling parks and preservation. This is very important. Preservation, no pass-through. You get to use the financing savings as equity in your project.
Free money.
So, next slide, please. So with the OHCC program from the agency, there are two legal documents. One is the declaration that the developer signs with the rest of their stack of legal documents, and the other is the certificate that the lender receives that details all of the tax credits they're earning over the period of the tax credit. Oh, that's a good point. The credit can run up to 20 years unless USDA RD is attached. In that case, it can run up to 30 years. That means you get to generate a credit for each of those years as a lender, and the developer gets to receive those cost savings over the course of that 20-year period. You can also refinance at any point if things change. Next, so there are a couple of things to remember. Units with vouchers attached, project-based vouchers or tenant-based vouchers are not eligible for pass-through. Since the cost savings do not actually go to the tenant in those cases, you cannot demonstrate pass-through. So any projects with project-based vouchers or tenants with tenant-based vouchers, you can still apply for OHTCs in a couple of circumstances if you're preserving the affordability, or if you have non-project-based voucher units, you can just target the pass-through to those non-project-based voucher units. Oh, yes, another important thing, OHTCs are generally added on last. So the project should already be financially viable before the OHTC rent reduction, the financing reductions are added in. Already talked about the pass-through can be targeted. And we like it when the pass-through is expressed in 10% increments. So what that means is if your project is a LIHTC project and you have 60% units, the OHTC should be used at a minimum to achieve 50% units. But also you can target them to get even deeper affordability. And next slide, please. Okay, so there are lots of ways to get OHTC. We have a standalone application where if you only want OHTCs for like refinancing or for preservation or for new construction, any reason at all, you can apply through that process, which is a non-competitive process, which is open annually. That'll probably still be the case after we decide on how we're redoing the NOFAs. We're going to have a competitive and a non-competitive track. And next, the important thing is, back to that slide one more. Yep. So the thing that I do most with my job is track the annual cap. Essentially, the legislature has said that there can only be $35 million worth of tax credits per year, and that's a cumulative total. So every single project with tax credits over their 20-year compliance period, each year, that amount of tax credit generated adds up to the cap. Right now, for 2024, the cap has about $19 million remaining out of $35 million, which means basically with the 250 OHTC projects over the last 20 years, there's a lot of OHTC available. Next slide. Okay, so this year at the legislative session, the legislature passed HB 2071, which adds limited equity co-ops as an improved project type for OHTC. This is a homeownership model. It's brand new. We are still trying to figure it out. In fact, our homeownership division is hiring an OHTC specialist right now to work with me in developing this program. So if any of you want to learn more about that, feel free to reach out and I will push you toward them. Next slide.
Okay, this is me. Okay, I just kind of want to get a feel of the room here. Who uses OHTC in their work on a regular basis? Okay, so I think we have a lot of, who's familiar with the OHTC already? Okay. Who feels like they need a little bit of OHTC 101? Do you want to go give it a go?
Okay.
Sorry for putting you on the spot.
No, that is fine. That's happy to do it. Okay, so essentially what the OHCC is think of it as like a three-way trade. OHCS wants reduced rents for low-income Oregonians. The developer wants cheaper financing costs, and the lender would like to pay fewer taxes. We get together and make that happen.
Okay, thanks, Martin. Okay, so like I said, I am on the finance side and we issue loans with OAHTC. So Network for Oregon Affordable Housing is a little bit of a different type of lender. We're not a bank, we're a not-for-profit. And the way our pool of funds is gathered is we have a whole bunch of member banks that give us a portion of funds to lend to different multifamily affordable housing developments. So basically that means that all of these lenders or all of these banking institutions put their money in one pot. So all of their exposure and risk is diluted significantly when we're lending, to one project. And the upside to this for the OAHTC is that there are a lot of banks in our pool, and all of those banks have a footprint in Oregon, and so they have a tax liability. And so at NOAA, we are able to issue loans with pretty much no limit to the OAHTC. Typically, a banking institution will have a certain amount of tax liability, and they will only need a certain amount of tax credits to cover that tax liability. So one great thing about working with NOAA is that we can use all of the OAHTC that you have been awarded. So OAHTC is typically utilized during the permanent loan period, and that's how NOAA is able to take on the tax credit. It is possible to use it during the construction period. I have to say that I have not seen that widely used, but it has been used. It is widely used. Go for it.
Oh, it is not widely used, not yet. Because of the pass-through requirement, we only allow it to be used on construction loans when it is a preservation project.
Thank you. And I don't do any construction loans. So
I just learned something new today too.
more fun for the future. So yeah, I only do perm loans, and we can utilize the OAHTC during that period. Typically, as Marin mentioned earlier, the OAHTC period is 20 years, and the term of the NOAA loan is also typically 20 years. So it lines up well with the term of the tax credit. And that is important because once the tax credit expires, that interest rate reduction goes away. And so we want to make sure that we are setting our borrowers up for success and looking at the capability of refinancing or resyndicating when the OAHTC credit expires, so that you don't get into a situation where you're gonna have to pay quite a bit more in interest over, a longer loan term. As the slide says, there's an up to a 4% rate discount. That is the maximum, I will say, in this rate environment today. We are able to utilize that entire 4% rate reduction. However, not too long ago, we were in a situation where our rate, which is 275 basis points over the 10-year treasury right now, was, hovering around 4.1 or so percent without the OAHTC. And so in that case, we are a business. Even though we are a nonprofit, we have expenses to cover. And unfortunately, we have to have a floor for our OHTC. So at the moment, our floor is 1%. However, unfortunately, that's not applicable at the moment. I will say that, like you said, if there are projects with USDA rural development subdebt, the tax credit period can be up to 30 years. And it can be shorter than that as well. Also with the 20-year tax credit period for any permanent loans, we can consider a shorter tax credit period. I think one other thing that I didn't put on the slide that is also really important is that there's no penalty for repaying before the OAHTC tax credit period is over. So if something happens and you want to resyndicate, refinance, you're going to be just letting those credits go back to OHCS without any penalty whatsoever. Okay, next slide. Okay, underwriting the OHTC pass-through. This gets a little bit tricky, and I'm really going to let Clayton do the meat of this because you are the person who does this on a unit-by-unit basis. As a lender and the investor as well, we just want to make sure that the loan that we're looking at and the project that we're working on meets the requirements of Oregon Housing and Community Services and the program requirements that are that have been laid out for us. So what we're looking at is the credit calculation is being met based on the amount of pass-through that is being delivered. So basically, there's a calculation that happens. It says, here's your loan amount. This is your OAHTC award. This is how many credits you're going to get. We're going to average that out over the 20-year loan term, and each year you're going to have to demonstrate that X amount of pass-through in rent reduction is going through to the tenants. From the lender perspective, we just want to make sure that that total number is being met. On a unit-by-unit basis, we are not keeping track, but we want to make sure that everybody's in compliance, right? Let's see. We also need to consider discount to market for each unit type. Okay, so this is important because as you've probably been hearing throughout this conference, the maximum area median income rents are sometimes unaffordable for the average resident. And so while the industry developers can set rents at the maximum that is identified by Oregon Housing and Community Services, that's not always something that is, good for the residents, and which also means it's not good for marketing. And that is something that the lender needs to take into consideration in order to make sure that vacancies aren't high and that the loan payments can be made. So the new OHCS pro forma is a little bit different than in previous versions. And the way that the OAHTC pass-through is illustrated is in one lump sum. In past pro formas, we've seen it each unit type kind of in a matrix showing the discount on each of the unit types. And I just wanted to let the room know that that is something that is really important for your lender and investor, because they are going to want to do a unit by unit discount to market analysis to make sure that all of those units are at a reasonable rate for what people, residents in the market can actually afford, and actually, units that they can actually live in for the long term and is sustainable. So you're going to see, most likely, at least from NOAA and all of the investors that I've worked with, a request for a unit by unit discount to market analysis going forward, which will be a little bit outside of what is required in the OHCS pro forma. Okay, next slide. Here's just a brief visualization of what we look at in terms of the discount to market. So here you can see on the left that there are the unit types, and I can't actually see it very well. Sorry, everyone.
So yeah, we've got unit types, and definitely folks that are online might actually have a better view at this magically. So at the end of this, we've got several of these slides that are a lot of like spreadsheet heavy. So folks in the room can definitely like circulate up here like after or during like Q&A to check these out. But basically unit type, and then your gross rent AMI. And Rachel, do you want to walk through kind of what that means and is translating into in terms of dollars?
Yeah, so that is like the starting rent basically before the utility allowance. And so the rent that's actually charged to the tenant is the net rent, which is in the next column over. So on that left-hand tranche, you're going to see the pre-OAHTC rents. And then on the right hand, you're going to see how the sponsor has discounted the rents in order to meet the OAHTC pass-through requirement. And then on the very right-hand column, you're going to see that there's a required pass-through amount, and that's based on that calculation that I talked about earlier, which probably didn't really mean very much because it was just a lot of word salad. And then the bottom part is the actual pass-through. And you can see that they're just barely over their pass-through requirement. And that's generally what we like to see. I mean, if a developer wants to have a greater pass-through discounted rents, that is totally okay, but we just want to make sure that they're not under the requirement.
And really what we're looking at here is your delta, your difference between your net rent before pass-through and then net rent after pass-through. And that number is the magic number that, you know, basically on the developer side, we're setting up our pro formas so that, like you said, we're, you know, just hitting, you know, in the compliance area, but not going way over that, so that we're not, you know, losing income without taking advantage of more tax credits if we can help it.
Yeah, that's right. And as Martin mentioned earlier, you can spread out the OAHTC pass-through kind of however you want to, as long as it makes sense for marketing purposes. And you know, it varies between each developer, each location, even each building. In a lot of cases, you'll see most of the units that are discounted slightly. I've even seen some, in one case in particular, 2 units were rent-free, and that took care of their entire pass-through requirement. So there's a lot of creativity you can put into the pass-through calculation. And another thing that's worth mentioning is that the pass-through that is illustrated in this chart right here is not the end-all be-all. You can adjust it as units are leased up throughout the term. So, you know, you could start with one that doesn't have pass-through and then decide, oh, this isn't working for us in terms of, you know, getting a resident or family into the unit, and, you know, discount the rent, and that would count towards pass-through. And then the next unit you lease up, you can raise it a little bit. So as long as you're meeting that baseline pass-through number, that's what's matter. That is what matters. Okay, next slide. This is clean.
All right. So I've got a little list of like little tips, tricks, cheats, whatever you want to call them. If they don't get covered in questions, I'll make sure I tell you all about them, but I'm going to blast through these slides really quick. So like Rachel was saying, on the developer side, and we love the fact that OHCS only looks at the total pass-through dollars. And Martin and his team don't want to be all up in my business about, oh yeah, are you doing units, you know, 3A, 3B, and 3C from 60% AMI rents to 40% AMI rents? Martin just wants to make sure, and also Rachel just wants to make sure, hey, you guys are hitting your pass-through that you've committed to every single year. And so that's kind of, on the developer side, we're allowed to be flexible throughout, you know, obviously when we're creating a pro forma, we love to say, this is how it's going to be for the next 20 or 30 years. Everybody knows that's a lie, but just don't worry about it. But your asset manager and your property manager have flexibility during that whole 20 or 30 year compliance period to say, hey, we might want to move that pass-through rent amount onto different units, whatever makes sense. So this slide basically just is showing that you can put that pass-through on all units if you don't have project-based vouchers involved, or you can put it on some units, or like in the case that Rachel gave, you know, if you're like, hey, we have let's say 2 units that maybe we're housing, you know, an IDD or SPMI population that we want rent free, you can do that too. So next slide. And one of the key things on my end that I like to put together to translate, because that's the whole thing of the developer's job, is to translate all of this layering of all your different financing to your, you know, OHCS, to your lender, to your investor, but then also to your property management folks and to your asset management folks to explain like what the heck you just did to set this project up. And so, you know, and everybody in this room, I'm sure, can create something way prettier than this, but this is my attempt at showing, hey, these are all the different layers, and this is actually from 2 real projects of financing that I have on here. And I'm showing, here are rents before pass through, and then here are, the units that have OHTC pass through applied to them. And like I said, you can show this a lot of different ways, but it's super helpful to have a table that's tracking all of this. So next slide. This is another way of showing this. This is actually, I think, Rachel, this is your format. Both I've worked with NOAA and UMPWA on several projects, and this is a format that they both are okay using to kind of show, and this has these nice big columns of, here is both my income limit and my actual rents in AMI before and then after pass through. That is a key thing. One of the key things I'll hit on right here is that just because your rents are being reduced by pass through doesn't mean that you have to reduce the AMI income restriction. So you can have somebody move into a unit and they pay the equivalent of a 50% AMI rent, but they can still qualify for that unit at, let's say, 60% AMI income. So their household income can be 60%, or if you're working with GHAP or other funds that allow up to 80%, you can do that too. So just, split those things apart. And I make this mistake all the time. So it's so hard to remember this, but like, keep those 2 things apart in your mind. Rent and income, you can split them apart when using OHTC. So next slide. And so this is this would be a table of, hey, this is what I would send my lender or investor. Again, just another way of showing, hey, here's all my units in the project. Here is our, net rent. And then here is basically the max rent available for a unit. And then that net rent is translated into here. So it's showing my overall pass through. And this being, the way I've set this up on my end is positive number here. We're all good. We're hitting our pass through requirement by just a little bit. And so, but I'm still staying within the 10% benchmarks that Martin loves too. And again, feel free after this, y'all can circulate through. We can go back through these. I know this is super spreadsheet heavy. So, all right, next slide. All right, yeah. And so this is exactly what Martin was talking about, is that this is a total partnership between developer, OHCS, and then your lender and investor. So at this point, I'm going to open it up for questions, but the surprise is that we have made.
Clayton has made.
Okay, well, I was trying to spread the love, but I have made fresh, handmade, free range organic memes about OHTCs that anybody who asks a question, you get to pick from. I think I have like a dozen. I was obviously procrastinating from doing something else. So you ask a question, you get to pick out your very own special OHTC meme that I printed off for you. Sorry, online people, just hit me up after and I'll send you a meme. So who's got our first question? Okay, let me.
While you're walking over there, I just want to mention that with the OHTC, you don't need to have your entire loan amount covered by the OHTC award. If you have a project that is, for example, like partially project-based vouchers, you can ask for a partial award so that you can incorporate the rent reduction on those units that don't have the project-based vouchers, but also still retain those voucher units.
Okay. Hi, I'm Samantha. I'm from Northwest Coastal Housing. I'm the project manager for our team, and I'm new to affordable housing, so I've been absorbing so much. Construction development side's one thing, the affordable is a new world. And so I'm learning the layering, the onion layers of making the money come together for these projects. We have a current project we're actually working with them on. And from my understanding though, a situation came up or a conversation came up that we couldn't do certain things with their rents because it would cause them to double dip, because the kind of funding that we had coming in for the wildfire relief fund have a project going on with that, and there was concern with these tenants, if they have certain vouchers, that would prohibit them, like, they would clash, basically, like, so my question is, are there any certain lending, or investing, or any kind of the funding that's coming in that you know of that they don't work together from a tenant level? So if we're developing this when we have funds coming in here, but then we have tenants over here trying to serve who are on a different kind of program, trying to live in these, they can't because the money was clashing. So do we see that often, or is this because this project's very special? Or I just don't, or is that something you guys see other places?
Yeah, so, and just I think overall it's about subsidy layering and what works and what doesn't. So Martin, I'll let you start.
Yep. So for the most part, OHTCs work with every single funding source except vouchers. Like I said, because the pass-through benefit has to benefit the tenant. And if they have a voucher, they're only paying like one certain percentage of their income no matter what, and then the voucher pays the rest. So as long as there are non-voucher units to pass through the pass-through savings to, then you can use OHTC.
Okay, who had our next question? And name and organization if you don't mind.
Hello, my name is Sarah with Sabin CDC in Northeast Portland. And last December, we just completed 2 apartment complexes for tax credit, 41 units. And I haven't quite understood, maybe you guys can help me understand this, is we require the tenants to make 2 times the rent that we charge for the units. Why is that? If it's low-income housing and we're requiring them to have a certain amount of income, doesn't that exclude a bunch of people?
And clarifying question, is this requirement coming from your, do you have a third-party property management? Okay, so at least from what I've seen is there are some property management companies that do require income limits going in, or in terms of it has to be 2 or 3 times. I do know though, and this is triggering a thought in my head, Martin, on the OHCS pro forma, there is a box that developers have to check about household income underwriting being X amount above. Is that ringing any bells on your end?
So for pro forma questions, I would highly suggest you bother Mitch Hanoush. He loves those questions. The pro forma is his baby. Everything wrong with the pro forma is his fault. That said, so generally speaking, from OHCS's perspective, what we want is for you to hit AMI targets, 80% for state resources except lift, 60% for most other resources. And as long as the tenants, meet that 60% AMI, then they qualify for the unit. And I don't think that we look into it any further than that.
Yeah, and from the lender's perspective, same thing. We're looking for what you're looking for.
So yeah, and that definitely does flag like affordability issues. Obviously, from a property management perspective, and I'm obviously not a property manager, but talking with a lot of them, you are wanting to make sure that you're moving in a tenant who can afford the rent and who won't be overly rent burdened. Obviously, in our world, there are not a whole lot of people who are moving in that are just going to be paying 30% of their or 27% of their income on rent. So, it's a tricky line. I think it's something that has to be determined on the organization level and within property management. Okay, who's next?
Just a clarifying question, for compliance aspect, the only thing that we're required to do is the annual report, showing where we're applying that pass through to. And then once the program expires, is there anything we need to do, or it's just done and over and our interest rate increases?
That is an excellent question. So yes, from OHCS's perspective, the only thing we care about is that you're passing through the total required pass through annually. And then how you divvy that up after that is up to you. And when the 20-year term ends, someone from OHCS will reach out to you and give you a piece of paper that says your need to continue compliance is ended.
Yeah, and that is super important. I actually do have a meme about this. So that once your compliance period is over, or once you've, hey, like, somebody on your team got a Powerball ticket and is paying off the mortgage on the property, it's done. So all of your compliance associated with the OHTC program is done. One thing I will say, while you're under the compliance period, and you're modeling, you're putting together a pro forma, or you're working with property management to do budgets, make sure that your OHTC compliance fee is in there. And so that fee starts off high because you've got your full principal balance of your loan going in, and then it reduces over time. I make this mistake all the time of thinking I've got just like the coolest pro forma going, and then I look at it and say, ooh, I forgot my OHTC fee, and now my DCR is below a 115 or whatever it might be. So don't forget, during that 20-year period before that compliance burns off, you do have the compliance fee in there too.
Yeah, and I will add that the compliance fee is there because the lender pays OHCS, and we have also compliance requirements that we have to comply with for the state to utilize the tax credits. And because of that, any banking institutions that don't have a footprint in Oregon will not offer loans with OAHTC. And also many of the banks that do have a footprint in Oregon also will not offer loans utilizing OAHTC, because that compliance is just something that they're not really set up for, or they can give their money to NOAA and we can issue the loans.
And you got to follow up.
Oh, I'm Katie. I'm with the Housing Authority of Yamhill County. So I contact OHCS for the letter once it expires, or I can reach out to them for that documentation, because I found one of our properties documents. It appears that had expired in 2019, but we've still been doing the pass-through credits. So I just want to make sure I have everything I need.
So that is an excellent point. We've recently done a lot of work internally to revamp how we do OHTC compliance, and there's some lag between getting everything settled. But yes, you should definitely reach out to your asset manager, and they should be able to issue that completion paperwork right away.
Yeah, like tomorrow. Is this something we can blame on Mitch?
Unfortunately, no.
Oh,
no,
okay,
you
sorry.
can't blame it on Mitch.
All right.
Hi, Rachel Sneedham from Gorman and Company. I'm just curious to hear a little bit more about the exit side. What does that look like? Is it from the lender perspective, and just how we kind of get through that process with you? So we have some loans that are older, and we don't do this anymore, that have 30-year terms, and there's a 20-year OHTC period. So as you can imagine, in year 20, the OHTC goes away, but we still have 10 years left in the term. Unfortunately for those loans, what happens is the interest rate increases up to 4%, depending on how much it decreased, at funding. And the partnership property is on the hook for paying that increase in interest. We highly encourage and give lots of notice before the OAHTC period is over, in order to help developers realize that this is going to be an extreme hardship on their property, and to give an opportunity to refinance. And I will say that utilizing additional OAHTCs during refinance is a great way to avoid this problem. On our newer loans and what we issue today, the loan term matches the OAHTC compliance period. So basically, when your loan term's out, that's when the OHTC expires. And so we don't run into that problem anymore. but I have a question. When the OAHTC expires, like with the Housing Authority of Yamhill County, how do the rent increases work?
That is an excellent question. So essentially, what happens is the OHTC declaration falls off. You no longer need to comply with anything in it. And that means that the rents then go back to however they were set in other funding sources. So if you have LIHTC on the property, they would probably go back up to 60%. This is a fun bit of trivia. We recently discovered that some of our documents, LIHTC documents, have the OHTC rent reductions like hardwired into them, calling them OHTC specials. Our compliance section is currently digging them all out and working on doing amendments. So if you have any like that, you'll probably get someone from OHCS reaching out to you. But essentially, yeah, once the OHTC restrictions are gone, it just goes back to whatever the other restrictions were.
And that is such a good question. And I want to pick up on two things there. One, on the refinance side of you can pull down new OHTC debt. One, because OHCS has the standalone application. And two, because, and Martin, I think the technical term would be bukus of OHTCs just sitting there, not being used. So use that stuff. If the compliance period is over, you're needing to refinance. Two, excellent point, and I love that. I'm always going to remember that now about the OHCC specials that are out there. Make sure when you're entering in with your compliance documents ahead of closing and all that paperwork's flying around, make sure that you're setting up all of those different regulatory documents at the maximum income and rent levels that they will allow. Don't write in your after pass-through OHTC rents into your GHAP document that lets you go up to 80%, or into your LIHTC regulatory agreement that lets you go up to 60%. Have those things maxed out. OHCS is just fine with it. Your investor is fine with it. Rachel's fine with it. So just make. Did this mic just die? Okay, good.
Hi, I'm Allie Davis with Ethan & Co. Are there restrictions for student housing projects?
For student housing projects? No, I don't think we've ever actually done a student housing project at OHCS.
So student housing doesn't qualify for LIHTC, low-income housing tax credits. So typically, and I don't know how this would work with a standalone because I don't actually know the code about this, but if it's a LIHTC project, it's never going to be student housing. So I think that's the short answer is no, that's the thing. It's
So we recently started offering OHCC as a standalone resource. There isn't anything specifically disallowing student housing to use OHTCs as long as the students housed there meet, the AMI requirement of minimum 80% when it's standalone. Then I'm probably getting out of my skis right now. I'll probably need to do some research and give you a better answer.
Sorry, I had a follow-up question to your comment about when it expires and the rents go up, the resident portion goes up. I don't know if you'll know, but does that play into the 90-day notification to the residents and our cap for the year?
That is a good question. Right now, OAHTCs are not included in the push process, for when we tell people their rents are going up over a certain timeline. That said, you should give your tenants as much warning as possible. And remember, when the OHCC expired, if you want to get another permanent loan with OHCC attached, that is very easy to do.
And I will say on the developer side that you can increase your rents after the OHTC expires. I will say if, and this is like, I'm taking off my, Daddy Warbucks developer hat and putting on my fair housing and keeping things affordable. If the property is running along in the black and you've got an awesome DCR and things are going great, you don't have to increase rents if the property is used to, in quotes, receiving that much income after pass through. So who's the next?
Hi, my name's Jean. I'm with National Equity Fund. I've run a lot of these, but I never asked like why. I was just like duplicating. So this has been really helpful. But I think one of the things I was wondering is how do you calculate the amount of pass through that's required?
That's a good question. Essentially, the total pass-through is equal to the total tax credit.
And I wish I had a better answer as developer, but I just use the old, I'll in quotes again, old OHCS 4% pro forma to just plug in, and then it's got this nice, I'll call it an amortization table that just spits out all the good numbers that I need, and then I use that to structure my pass through. So yeah, there's math involved. Rachel, do you know? You seem like the kind of person that would know more
Okay,
here.
so I was trying to remember what percentage the tax, do you remember?
No.
Okay, so there's a percentage of, okay, let me back up. So when you apply in your NOFA for OAHTC, you apply for a certain amount of OHTC tax credits. So once you get that amount of tax credits, they are divided by the number of years in the term of the compliance period. And then that average is the amount of pass-through that is required annually. So even though you're utilizing more OAHTC upfront because your loan principal is higher upfront and the interest is higher upfront too because of that, the amount of pass-through that's required remains the same annually throughout the compliance period.
Yeah, so for an easy math problem, it would be, let's say you've got $2 million in pass through over 20 years would be 200,000 annual. Obviously that's a massive project, but, and this is on my little list of, cheats and hints, that I've picked up. And this was actually something that we recently put to OHCS in an FAQ as part of a funding app. And they said, yep, sure can. So that static pass through, it's a mortgage, and everybody knows your mortgage, unless you've got a floating arm or something like that, it is going to stay a static payment. Well, your rents hopefully are going to go up over time. And so that's something to be aware of and articulate to, if you're a developer, articulate to your asset management folks. If you're an asset manager, talk to your property manager. They should be watching that your incomes are going to go up, and the amount of actual pass through that you may be generating on those OHTC units goes up. But your loan amount doesn't increase. You don't get more tax credits over that 20-year term. So you can shrink that pass-through gap. Let's say, in year 10, it's like, well, dang, I've got so much extra actual pass-through here. You can say, well, we were buying down from 60 to 30%. Maybe you want to go 60% to 40% buy down, or 60% to 50%, depending on your tenants, unit mix, all of that. But that's a great point about this is a static number. Properties and income and all of that are not static.
And that is an excellent point. That's also why OHCS has stopped monitoring the unit by unit level of pass-through, because the amount of annual pass-through stays the same, but like Clayton said, rents go up. The actual value of the pass-through shrinks over the 20-year term, which means you do need to adjust it regularly.
And the percentage I realized that I was thinking about is actually associated with the OHTC compliance fee, which is 5%. Thank you. And that's why it decreases every year, because the annual amount of tax credits that the lender is utilizing decreases over the term of the loan.
decreases with the principal.
Exactly.
A little bit. So this is maybe a modeling question, but I feel like I see this usually modeled as a pass through on the rents, right? But then the rents are increasing depending on what the developer is saying at like 2% or 2.5%. And then of course your pass through is going to get messed up a little bit. I feel like depending on how things are. So wouldn't it make more sense to model it as a fee? Like you have all of your rents and then just at the bottom of your, after vacancy, you just say minus this amount of money. I mean, and I guess you could connect it to certain units, but it doesn't, now when you say that way, it doesn't make a lot of sense to put it on, I don't know. Yeah, mind blown.
That's a fun one. Honestly, the current pro forma, like the updated one that we made so that we could actually use ProLink. What we do with it is we model the pass through as a debit on operating income. It's one of the reasons why all of our sponsors and developers love the old pro forma, because it has so much more functionality for, like modeling OHCC.
But that, I was just thinking that is that the new pro forma does essentially model it more as what you're saying, as a fee. So you could, go off of that. Yeah. I mean, we're all coming up with it together. Like, just because I'm holding the microphone, just because they're up there doesn't mean we're the experts. So
Yeah, you're right. It is just in the end one lump sum. But as I was mentioning earlier, your investor and your lender are going to want to see the unit by unit to do the market analysis.
Why are manufactured parks excluded?
That is an excellent question. It was written into the legislation that way back at the very beginning, sometime in the 90s.
Also, because the manufactured home park program does not have rent limits, it only has income limits. So there's nothing to pass through if there's no rent limit.
excellent question. I learned something we're up to 3 or 4 things I've learned today. So
hi, my name is Nikolai, and I'm currently unemployed and looking for roles in development, underwriting, or syndication, or anything like that. So if you're looking for someone, come look to me. Anyways, my question was, so at least as I understand it, the entirety of the benefit of the reduced rate is passed through in the form of rent reductions. So I'm thinking as the developer here, is the primary incentive then that you can close the gap by qualifying for more debt, or is there, I guess maybe I'm just missing where the financial incentive for the developer is, or yeah.
why do we go after this thing? 1, because it's super easy to get. 2, because it's got such little regulatory paperwork and stuff. But the big one is the rate buy down. It really does allow you to leverage a lot more debt into a project. And I will say, and this is a shameless plug for NOAA, because they are so friendly and do this forward rate lock that's like just years into the future, when you're closing on a project, when you're closing on your construction debt, is you're able to take that really low bought down OHTC buy down rate and lock that in. So if Jay Powell wakes up tomorrow and has had a bad night of sleep, you're not going to be negatively affected by that. So your rate isn't going to float around, and you've got that additional buy down. Rachel, from the lending perspective, anything else you want to, I guess, because you talk obviously a lot more developers in terms of other advantages or other reasons why they're going into this program.
Yeah, I think another thing is just that a lot of the developers that utilize the OAHTC program are mission driven. And, our entire reason for being here is to provide the most affordable housing for Oregonians as possible.
And also remember, preservation, pass-through exempt.
Yeah, big one. I hope If anybody does a preservation project that isn't fully project-based vouchers, it's basically free pass-through. And if you don't use your OHTCs, I hope there's like a rock under your bed or something like that. You should not sleep well at night. Okay, who's next? Other questions? These are really good. I really appreciate everybody here that's like just throwing it out there. There are seriously no dumb questions because I've made all the dumb mistakes already. So low hanging fruit.
I'm Zach Schroeder. Clayton and I work at the same organization. I'm kind of curious why we're not using this on more projects. Is it just because of the limitation of banks? I mean, is that why we don't have it on more programs or projects in the state of Oregon? Is the footprint?
I mean, it's a good question. I think you should use it more often. Gives me something to do. That said, it is currently attached to roughly 250 projects across the state over the last 20 years.
Which is an insanely low number, right, Zach? Yeah, and that is a great question. Why don't more people use this? I don't know. I've tried to incorporate it into every single development I've done. It just seems like such an easy mix, especially when we're hunting, high and low for grants, other types of funding. It plays so well, especially when you're working with Rachel on all of these, unique loan products. It's like y'all are doing RD stuff out there, which I don't have enough hair left to do RD. So, but yeah, so it's one of those things where go after it. It really is such low hanging fruit. So good
Yeah,
question.
I think that is also a product of it not being available. A lot of financial institutions just don't offer it. And especially during a low rate environment, the incentive to use it is a little bit less because, if your rate is low somewhere else, then you don't need that rate buy down.
Yeah, and that is a good point. Obviously, we've been in this like lovely place of low rates. That's doesn't exist anymore. And at least from like the, oracles hiding in caves is not going to exist for like another 5 or 10 years. So.
Okay, so this is probably just me hearing things in the conference that I don't completely understand, and I'm trying to put them together. But I heard that these work really well for workforce housing projects in terms of getting it to pencil. But then I heard that it's really hard to sell those credits and to actually use it. So like you get, the OHCCs, and then now suddenly you can't find a home for them. Is there a reason for that?
Yeah, this goes along with the last question where there are not a lot of financial institutions that are offering loan products that utilize the OAHTC. So you are completely right that this is an amazing product for workforce housing because the income restrictions and rent restrictions are set at 80%. So it's completely possible to put a pro forma together and do a development where, the income requirements are higher than your typical tax credit project. But there are not a lot of places out there that are utilizing the OHTC and its lending products. But email me. I have cards if you want to come get some afterwards.
Yeah, and I will say just this whole, workforce and middle market is a hard nut to crack, especially right now. So, and I haven't figured it out either. So, like if folks in this room are trying to like make that work, I will say OHCC is a powerful tool. It's not your like magic wand though. So yeah, come talk to me if you figured it out because I want to know.
I do have a current project that is utilizing OHTC and LIFT and some sub debt from a CDFI that is targeting 80 to or around 80%. So it's possible, but it's tricky.
Hi, everyone. Grace Chang, I'm Core Bank. To clarify on Jean's question, crowd sourcing wisdom here. This credit, the Oregon Affordable Housing Tax Credit, is also sometimes colloquially known as the lender's tax credit. Somebody up there smarter than me probably already mentioned it. So because we're a LIHTC heavy industry, we tend to think of tax credits as like buying an equity, but the lender's tax credit, nothing's sold. There's no like equity purchased. It's just this rent discount on the perm interest rate. So clarification there, because that always blows people's mind that there's no equity to sell, there's no tax credits to sell, even though it's also called a tax credit program.
Thanks, Grace.
Yeah. On to questions, so I can learn many, many things like Clayton today. I'm gonna hog the mic for a few minutes. Sorry, guys. Martin, can you say more about what counts or what counts as a preservation project? Is there a certain way the state defines that?
So right now, the state specifically in the statute defines preservation projects for the purposes of OHTC as preserving essentially federal rent assistance contracts from HUD or USDA RD. We're currently working on a legislative concept to change that to include more preservation projects. But right now, it just, as long as your project has vouchers or a USDA RD mortgage, anything like that, it qualifies for the pass-through exemption. Oh, and we have also allowed for other kinds of vouchers to be included to get the exemption.
That's a great nuance, because I think many in this room would consider any type of rehab project a preservation project. So it's good to know there's a difference between how the state statute defines it versus how we would all think of it.
I agree completely. I had to do a whole bunch of preservation stuff last year, and it came up a lot. It's why we've been working on the legislative concept to hopefully change it, to expand it and use it for all sorts of preservation types of projects.
Love it. We should all sign that ballot. 20-year term, is there flexibility on the 20-year term? Is that a minimum? What is the minimum?
There is no official minimum, but the 20-year term is the max. Except for USDA RD deals, where NOAA's term max is 25 years, and other lenders are available to offer sometimes 30-year terms.
Tell us what your max.
Oh, Clayton's letting a secret out of the bag. So we at Umpqua will consider Oregon affordable housing tax credits on our perm loans. However, we are also an investor in NOAA's pool and highly encourage you to consider a extremely mission-aligned nonprofit with very favorable terms. Plus, Rachel's just awesome to work with. We will also do a 20-year term if necessary. I guess opening it up back to Martin, is OHCS neutral on the 20-year term, or can you go down to as low as like 5, 20, 10, 15 years?
So we have to follow the statute, and the statute says up to 20 years. So anything in that region, we're fine with.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thanks. Okay, last question, then I'm going to stop hoarding the mic. Say I'm a developer that's new to OAHTCs, and I'm trying to figure out how to apply the rent pass-through across the units in my project. How would I go about figuring that out? Is there a strategy? Are there more pro tips on your sheet, Clayton, that we should know of?
That is a very, very good question. It's mostly based on, like you kind of look at the pro forma really hard, and the numbers start to like dance and you're like, yeah, those units. No, actually on the PowerPoints, do you mind going forward? Let's say 2 slides, maybe? One more actually. Yeah. Yeah, because this is totally readable from back here, not. But what basically this is, just describing it from back here. This is one of my unit matrix formats showing all the different layers here. And what I will do is look at, hey, these are units that maybe already have another program that is restricting rents on them. Let's say you've got one of these projects that have 10 different funding sources. And one of those funding sources might be home, which let's say you're having OHCS as your PJ. I'm totally blanking on what PJ stands for, so don't ask me right now.
Participating jurisdiction.
Thank you, Martin. So home funds through OHCS, they require your rents to be set at low home, which is basically 50% AMI rents. Well, if I'm a LIHTC project or even better, like a GHAP project or something like that, and I can start at 80% AMI, I can still demonstrate rent pass through from that 80 or 60% on that home unit. And Martin's totally fine with that. And my home is saying, hey, we're going to give you this home grant, but your rents for these X amount, let's say 10 units, have to be at 50% rents. Well, if they're already going to have to be restricted at 50%, why not? So it's not a project-based voucher program, so I can take advantage of it. So that's like a great example of, hey, this is like anytime you're using home, whether it's from OHCS or from us, like I know a lot of metro jurisdictions. I'm not a metro guy, but I know a lot of them have their own home funds. I'm very jealous. Use OHTC and layer that on with your home funds. Rachel or Martin, can y'all think of other instances or unit types or restrictions where that layering might be helpful, or anyone else in the room?
So I'm easily confused. So I just stick with total annual pass-through and leave that up to the developer.
Yeah, I mean, I think like you're saying, Clayton, it pretty much applies to any of the other restrictions where, if the OAHTC is restricted at 80 and you have a restriction that is lower and you want to layer that unit basically so that the resident's going to pay 60% AMI because that's where your LIHTC income limit is, but the OHT is saying 80%, you can use that as your that unit as a perfect one to use pass through on. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah, and obviously if people have other funding programs they're working within or have existing properties that, hey, we're looking at doing a preservation project on this and it's got these layers on there, like let's talk. But I would say red flag for, hey, this is a dead giveaway for a unit that I can apply this pass through to is it doesn't have a project-based voucher, but it's got some other kind of restriction on it that is reducing rents below your LIHTC or other maxes. So
Kind of like a built-in pass-through, path to pass-through.
yeah.
I will say too that if you are new to the industry, have questions, there's a lot of great consultants out there that can help you along the way to figure out the pass-through requirements. Do you have any other resources?
I am always happy to talk with any developer or sponsor about the OHCC program. And if I do not know something, I work with a whole bunch of smart people who can help me figure it out, and I will get you the answer.
Yeah, Martin's like a really nice guy. He's right there.
And Noah's also available for some technical assistance. We're not officially a consultant or anything, but if you have some questions, we're happy to have a conversation.
Any other burning last second questions? Okay, one more.
I already got one of the cool memes, so thank you. Just real quick, back to, are you doing rolling applications for this? Is it once a year that we'll see things? When can we expect that?
That is an excellent question. So past practice has been the OAHTC has been included with every single one of our NOFAs except for the PSH NOFA because those are vouchers and you can't use pass-through. And the standalone application through our combined pools application process is a rolling application process that's open year round. Going forward, we are completely revamping our NOFA process. In fact, there is another conversation going on downstairs where my colleagues are probably being yelled at. But But we will still have a non-competitive and competitive track, however that lands out. And the OHTC only projects will still be allowed to apply, on a rolling basis for OHTC.
And I will add an asterisk to Martin's comment about PSH. Is if you're doing an all PSH with PSH project-based vouchers, doesn't apply. The moment you have one unit in that PSH project that doesn't have a PBV on it, look at OHTCs. I've got a PSH project that's mixed. So it's got some vouchers and then it's got plenty of units that don't. I have OHTC on that project. So yeah, I think talk to Martin or talk to your production analyst at OHCS. If you have any questions about it, it is the most flexible program. So why not? Awesome. Thanks you all so much for sticking with it here at the end. This has been super fun. And thank you all so much for the awesome questions.